There's no point in meeting with loads of groups, saying that you're listening, and then not doing what they've asked.
So, Dawn, what do you think your impact is at Dorset Council?
Social work isn't a profession that is always well received or well presented in the press, for example.
Inclusivity and fairness is something you're very passionate about as well.
Oh, Sam, this is going to be a long day now. Don't get me started.
You're clearly quite values driven.
And when you bring it back to the simplest terms, it's just been about being a good human, isn't it?
It's a comfort thing. I think if you can sit with someone in silence, then you're probably quite comfortable.
Should we try it now?
It's not going to make a very good podcast. Today we're here with Dawn. Dawn, do you want to introduce yourself and who you're with?
I do. I'm Dawn Henderson. I'm a child protection team manager in the North locality, and this is Magnus. They are one of the supporters and attenders of Chesel Youth Pride. Magnus gained their name from young people. Magnus is very quiet this morning.
Magnus is shy.
Not, yeah.
Great. So should we free you from Magnus so you can get more comfortable? Or are you happy to stay?
I think, Magnus, are you all right sitting this one out? Yes, please.
Fair.
Okay,
Yeah.
that'll be cool. All right, I'll see you in a little while, Magnus. I'm going to put you on the sofa. Awesome.
So, Dawn.
Erin.
That was a very serious way to sit up.
I think I've been in these kind of interviews before.
Yeah.
Go on.
So, you've been a team manager for nearly 5 years now. What does that role involve, and what drew you to it in the first place?
The role currently oversees the child protection and court work. So that means it's supporting a team of social workers to make sure that children and families that are on child protection plan, some child in need plans, have the right plan for them so they can get the right help at the right time. If there's any court proceedings, then it's writing court reports, making sure that all of the information about the family is presented fairly and kindly to the judge. I've been working in Dorset now, it's actually coming up for 12 years this year, so grow your own I did my final social work placement in what was the youth offending team then, when it's in Dorset, and then started off, first of all, in the north, so I've kind of come full circle, but that was the lead for Dorset Family Matters. Then I moved to the Dorchester team for a combined social work team. I've been here ever since. So when we had Blueprint in 2020, then that's when the opportunity came along to apply for team manager.
And you said before when we filmed you around kind of the positive changes you like to see in the children and the families. Is there any moments you can think of that have kind of stuck with you, or the highlights in terms of?
You said we filmed before. It was filmed before, Sam, so I'm still not in my comfort zone.
Yeah.
So just so you know. The highlights are when the recognition from a family when they can really see that they've made that change, or some of the other things are when children don't feel able to talk immediately, when they find it difficult to share things, but then there's that little bit of a breakthrough where you've created a safe space for them and they feel able to talk about their views and their needs, and that's something quite special. But the whole approach with the family and being able to build those relationships and allow them to look at what they want to improve and support them to do so, then that's really important. Relationships, I think I've said before, are the most important thing to me. That's really what drives me, and finding that sense of fairness, so that in child protection, then sometimes you have to deliver some quite upsetting news, or you have to share things that people can find quite tough to help them improve. But there's no reason you can't do that kindly.
And what sort of things kind of help create that safe space? Is there kind of keep like tactics and objectives?
Top tips.
I know, yeah. Tips.
For me, it's always about being honest and being able to describe to, say, a parent exactly what our process is, because when we're working alongside families, it's almost as if we suck them into our professional world. And my preference is to flip that around. It's actually we meet them where they're at, because the process is sort of secondary to that emotion, but we have a duty to explain exactly what each thing would mean for them. So that's around consent, around what would happen in an assessment and what happens with in plans, but it has to be authentic, it has to be honest at every single stage, and also to be able to describe the various scenarios that may come next as well. Offering advocacy is usually a really beneficial way to support parents and children, because then that means that they've got somebody independent that they can talk to.
I think that whole flipping is probably quite a good lesson for all kind of public facing services in the council, is that sometimes you'll try to kind of absorb into the way the council does things rather than meeting people where they are. I think that's a good thing. It could be an approach.
I try to apply it to everything. So how do we know what someone wants unless we ask them? And if we make an assumption, are we going to get it right or not? So the use of self in social work can be really strong, really important. And it's not for everybody, but I do the best my learning, if I acknowledge my own vulnerabilities, because then you can potentially imagine how somebody else might be feeling. So all of us have parts of ourselves where we're vulnerable, or we find it tricky to share that, and that's essentially where families can be. So if you start there, you start with them, then there's something to build on. If we make assumptions or we think we know best, then we may get it wrong, and that just kind of wastes time, and it doesn't allow people to move on and be able to celebrate improvements that they make.
Excellent. We asked some questions before we started filming today. And you mentioned that you're actually quite shy, which probably would surprise people seeing as you came in the uniform.
Yeah. Which is just off over like Magnus.
Magnus is having a rest. I am quite shy. There's something a little bit about social work where you're presenting a confidence that it doesn't mean that I'm not confident, but there's something about being able to manage the situation that you're in, because we're all human, and doing this as well. So as I said just now, Sam, I am way out of my comfort zone. If I'm going to make myself look silly, then I need to do it on my terms when I choose to do it. So Magnus is my cover this morning. It can be tricky. So if the work that we do, then we do lots of multi-agency working, there's loads of partners, done tons and tons of networking over the years, loads of networking for Chesil Youth Pride and doing Pride work in the north as well. But sometimes there's that slight feeling, a little bit of imposter syndrome to overcome, and just realising, actually, I kind of do know what I'm doing here. And if I don't, there's people that I can ask. Outside of work, then I guess it makes me appear a little bit socially inept sometimes. It's because I like to work out my surroundings first, the people, and just observe before I dive in.
That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, do you find it quite draining, or?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do find it quite tiring, because especially in the role as a team manager, it's one of those vulnerabilities, really. Then I guess there's an expectation that you are a particular way, that you're always confident, and that you present yourself in a particular way all of the time. And I guess maybe not just for me, but for others as well, then there are competing things. And shyness is one of them, amongst others.
I do think if more people observed and listened and then thought before answering, the world would be a much better place.
I can't say I'm always very good at that. So if I did, then it wouldn't be a very authentic film for those that may watch it. I dive in when I get excited. So I recognise that in myself. If there's sometimes, then I do listen. I find it tricky if there's lots of noise or there's people talking over each other. I find it really difficult to follow a conversation. But I recognise in myself if I feel particularly strongly or excited about something, then I'm not always very good at waiting my turn.
That's not a bad thing. It's if it's something that you're passionate about. But I know you said about kind of inclusivity and fairness is something you're very passionate about as well.
Massively passionate about that, because people, whether we think so or not, people know themselves best, whether that is recognised internally or not. And my value basis, social work values and my personal values are about fairness. I get incredibly frustrated if I see something that I don't perceive to be fair. And that's the passion behind the inclusivity as well. So I've done a lot of work with young people for Chesel Youth Pride over the last 3 years, and that has meant returning to groups. And there's a real kind of trust that has been built with young people over those time, and I feel really quite privileged to be allowed to go back. And some of it is when they're in their youth groups and they can be talking about really sensitive things, but those relationships are important. The inclusivity, then the message from young people that I've worked with over that time remains consistent. So not just around sexual or gender identity, but being able to see the whole of who they are. And I think if you understand a whole person, then that's when you understand what their sense of belonging is. But unless you take the time to do that, then how would we know whether they're achieving that belonging or not? In social work, we use an assessment triangle. So when people have heard me speak about intersectionality, and I did like a Thinking Thursday workshop on it, the assessment triangle is essentially intersectionality. It's our job. So it's just wanting to know how different things fit together. Young people in the LGBT community talk about intersectionality a lot. They talk about the impact on their mental health. They talk about whether they feel safe in the community or education. And they talk about their neurodivergence as well. And they know they're probably a few steps ahead of what the professionals can be sometimes, is they know that all impacts on each other. And I think if we got that right, if we got things right about that whole me much earlier on, then it would be preventative, for instance, for mental health crisis or emotional health, or feeling as if you belong in school. So the positive impact of that is being able to manage education and being able to know where to go when you're exploring identity, or if you're feeling that there's any wobbles with emotional health. And maybe it would lessen the impact on our health services also, because we would all be seeing a whole person and supporting them for who they are.
If someone hurts themselves physically, you're like, oh, we can fix that. If someone mentally, there's not really the support there yet. It's like,
it's really tricky, and it's really difficult when you're in social care to. We work with health colleagues all of the time as one of our partners, and there is a social model and a medical model, but the underlying factor is it's about humanity, isn't it? And there's something in what you're just describing, Sam, is it's down to us to support rather than expect a child or a young person to fix themselves. So what do we do best to support them? If it was an adult, I'm wondering if we feel more comfortable to just ask an adult, what do you need? Whereas collectively with a child, then do we ask that? or do we think you're not old enough to understand? So it's showing that kind of respect. What is the difference? Just because they're younger, then why should it be any different? What is it you think you need? And if they say that they don't know, it's allowing them that time and space to explore that, or sit. You have to be quite comfortable with sitting in silence sometimes as a social worker also, because there's a temptation to just fill that gap, fill that silence, and then you don't learn, and it kind of gives a message of, well, you're not going to listen to me anyway, you're just going to say what you think. So it's a fine balance.
It's a comfort thing. I think if you can sit with someone in silence, then you're probably quite comfortable without like consciously trying to fill the gap or find something to do, then you're probably quite comfortable with them. So that's probably that safe space that's helping to create.
Should we try it now?
It's not going to make a very good podcast. People will skip through this section.
Just think everybody would watch to see how long the silence was.
Maybe at the end we'll sit in silence and I'll see how long people can stay after the video, after it finishes.
I mean, you're quite you're clearly quite values driven. That's important to you. Is it? I'm just wondering, you know, a bit of a chicken and egg. Is that what drew you to social work, or is that something that's kind of grown since seeing, you know, maybe some injustices and actually the ability you've got to support young people?
Oh, that, some of that would be sharing part of myself, Erin. So I had experiences when I was a child, which some young people, children and young people and families that we work with are going through, have gone through. So I left home quite early, and sort of felt like I'd fended for myself. I didn't do well in education, so there's hope for us all. I went to work at 16. I lived in a bedsit, and then over time, you know, the kind of sense of self and being driven to work and always learn. There was always that. There was something about always learning, always wanting to do training or know the why of everything. So that's always interested me. When I was little, I wanted to be a teacher. That didn't happen because I didn't do too great in school or in college for that matter at that point. But eventually, by the time I'd had my son when I was 30, then I trained then, and I ended up teaching. I was a lecturer manager at Yeovil College, and then after that I thought there was teachery things, and it edged into, you know, there was some young people, it was older learners, but some apprentices and stuff, and it kind of edged into there's things here that interest me. There's things that I could recognise with young people struggling with learning, which wasn't just about what was going on in a classroom, but the impact of things that were going on more widely than that. So I toyed with the idea of training again for a number of years, and then finally decided to take the plunge to give myself a 40th birthday present, to train as a social worker. And that's what I did. I did it then when I was around 40. And that value base, I guess it's always been there. I was born in the Midlands. It was really quite diverse. I enjoyed being in school. There was loads of different kind of beliefs within school as well. Unfortunately, my parents didn't have the same values, so they weren't particularly accepting of other ethnicities or of other genders or sexualities, which is quite a conflict. And I've never seen things that way. There's something about people as individuals, their beliefs. As long as you're not harming somebody, then we should be allowed to explore that. So I guess it did grow, and it's continued to grow over time. But that's because no matter what role I've been in, what job I've had, and always thought, let's stand to fairness. Always. That doesn't seem fair. Let's do something about it. There's a gap there. That doesn't feel right. Okay, what can we do to fill that gap? What would help to do that? And that's what drives me. Probably to the point of overcommitting myself sometimes, but you know, that's okay. it'll all get done.
So there's probably days that are quite tough or challenging, with maybe challenging people on fairness, making sure everything is fair, and even just kind of day-to-day kind of social work as a role. How do you kind of get through the tougher days, or what gets you through them? That's a hard question.
That is a really hard question. Some days are just such a roller coaster. If we think about the day job is the wrong term because all of it's part of the job. So you need to just be fairly pragmatic of what needs to be done if we're working in a crisis, what each step is. We slow it down so that it becomes safe and that you're making sound decisions. You always go to a service manager for oversight and feedback. So there's that opportunity to talk things through, to debrief, to sound off. Sometimes I just need to get this out. This is happening. Is like in a safe space to do that, and then I commute. So I live just over the border. So the drive home from whichever office I'm in generally entails loud music and reflecting on the way. Some pretty awful singing, which I don't do in public. And I don't care.
You want to show any now?
Oh, no, absolutely not. I wouldn't put anyone through that. So never ask me to do karaoke, Sam.
That was on the last further
What's
down the
that?
list. No.
Is that what the microphones are there for? And then I can just relax at home. I can just be me. My son still lives at home. It's always been me and him, and we've got the same sense of humour. So living with him is amazing because we just laugh inappropriately about all kinds of things. But that kind of gets me through. And I do coaching. I really enjoy doing coaching. It holds me in a reflective space. So I do that once a month. And I've done it a number of times over the years as well. It's really helpful.
Is that doing the coaching or being coached?
Being coached.
Interesting.
So it doesn't.
Yeah,
Not so. Otherwise, I have maybe me as an individual. Other people might manage it differently. I just have things bouncing around in my head all of the time, and know how to get there to get to the end result. But sometimes it's just like, wah. And coaching really helps. Just slow that down. What is it that you're really feeling? Feeling is important to me under that. So it's good. It's a good thing. I'd recommend it.
It's talking it all out, isn't it? Because I've done coaching before, and a lot of the time it's the person already has the answer. It's just
It's exactly what it is.
basically getting them to talk around it until eventually they click what. Because you're not going to be an expert in all the different areas that people are in. So it's trying to get them to realize their own answer. Because deep down they're going to know whatever the thing they need to do.
I find that, and generally I do, but it's better than feeling, I don't know, shouty and sweary about it at home when you can talk it through to
Sort of
someone
having
else.
that space, I think it always feels quite strange to start with coaching, that you've got this dedicated time and, you're just talking about yourself. You just,
There's something a little bit self-indulgent about that, isn't it? It's like, that's uncomfortable. I don't want to talk about me.
It's so rare, isn't it, to actually have that space to kind of actually stop and think. And, especially the way the world is now, you just kind of keep going, but actually given that space.
It's nice sometimes. It sounds selfish, but it is nice to have that kind of almost like one-way conversation.
Yeah.
Like it's just because if you're being coached, it's you're talking to the person.
Yes.
All this person is doing is listening and kind of trying to steer, but not without giving too much advice and things. Just trying to steer you.
There's something that the value of it for me is really important because we all need validation. So it's the same as children and families that we work with or other parts of the council where, I don't know, terminology of customers seems a bit strange as well to me because it's just all people to me. But there's something about us, we all need validation in some kind of way, and that coaching space is saying it's okay that you feel like that and it's okay that you can work that through. And that feeling of being lighter at the end of it is, it helps to regroup and reframe things. And I can do that often because, as I say, my head bounces around all the time. But I've always found it beneficial, and my coach is amazing. Other things around the values of that, the intersectionality again is Chelsea Youth Pride is in its 3rd year now, and it's on, which way is it? 28th of June. It's a Saturday, starts at 1 o'clock at Weymouth College. I mean, in the future when Chelsea Youth Pride is entirely community-led, then maybe there will be sponsorship there from companies, but what is really clear from young people is that they want it to be a youth event because it's about them. It's about their community and what that looks like for them in the future as well. And I think you're right, Sam. It's not about branding. It's about seeing things through. And I guess why I'm allowed to go back, why they invite me back across a whole range of groups. I have that privilege because the trust of the authenticity. And that's a real big thing for me, is you say you're going to do it and you do it, and doing it for the right reasons. There's no point in meeting with loads of groups, saying that you're listening, and then not doing what they've asked. And I'd rather not do something than not do it to a value base or not do it to their feedback. The Chelsea Youth Pride and things that its influence have been co-designed with young people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think, in terms of kind of inclusive workplaces, that they need to take the steps to become as kind of inclusive before the younger people start, so they feel safe? Or is there an element of like get the people once they're in, then they'll start to influence? Or do you think they'll start getting beat?
Oh, Sam, this is going to be a long day now. Don't get us started. I think any workplace, including us, should start with equality, diversity, and inclusion. That's the starting point. And then you build everything else out from that, rather than thinking I'll tag that on at the end. But we can't change the world in a day.
Yeah.
Maybe then what the work could be with the apprenticeship team in the future is there any gaps with any employers, or is there any gaps with us? I think we're getting better at being an inclusive employer and really understanding the intersectionality of the workforce. But is there anything that we can offer, or is there any training that may be needed so that LGBT equivalent people can feel safer as they take their first steps into employment? And I think that's something that we can support across the whole of the council. If we get it, if we're getting it right as a council, then we should be able to get it right in our communities and the other employers that we come into to contact with, and the apprenticeship team. Then I'm sure that they'll be great for those initial steps as well. They've jumped on the chance to be able to put this night together.
So what we see now is actually that, I guess people used to look for, what benefits do I get? But now what's more important to them is, is this, what are our values? Is it an inclusive organisation? And you'll see other companies have actually pushed that now to the top to share, we're doing this with climate change, but also, this is from an EDI perspective, this is what we're doing. But for us as well, in the way we promote the council, some of it needs to be that honesty and authenticity of where we're not where we want to be as well, because we don't necessarily want to say we're something and bring people into the organisation for them to feel, that wasn't what was said to me.
I get that. That's really something that is part of my value base. Is it needs to be authentic, and if it's not quite right, then don't try and dress it up or gloss over it. Just say and say what you're doing to put it right, or make it better, make things better, or even better when, as we hear so often, rather than pretending something is what it's not. They don't like that.
I think that's a good lesson kind of across all kind of professional workplaces, is to sometimes just be honest. It's honest if you don't. I think a good leader is someone who says I don't know, or let me find out more information about that, or rather than trying to act like but also just owning up when things need to improve, rather than but we're taking right steps. Instead just being like, we're not there yet, I think sometimes is more important. Like,
So we can all have words and things on paper.
Yes.
We can all have the mantra of kindness, but there's no point in keep saying things unless you act that way. And there's lots of things, that's again around fairness. So that's why I like to see things through to the end, that you do what you say you're going to do, that you turn up on time, because it's rude not to, and it gives the impression that you're not bothered, you don't care about that person or that group, or if you're running late, you at least let them know. So there's all of that, and when you bring it back to the simplest terms, it's just been about being a good human, isn't it?
Absolutely. Being kind, being a good human. Yeah, for sure.
which is why like those things should be obvious, to be
Yeah.
kind, to be open and authentic. But those should be things that people are already. So maybe if that's not happening, we need to do more of a effort to support the people to become like that, and also challenge them when they don't.
So, Dawn, what do you think your impact is at Dorset Council?
Oh, Erin, that's tough. Isn't it?
And that's been the podcast.
Wow. That was that silence.
I couldn't
I
laugh.
didn't want to interrupt the silence. That was
I
it.
ruined it straight. This is
You
why
did.
I ruined
You
it straight
jumped
away.
in.
Can't be comfortable.
I think the impact, well, I've been around for quite a long time, so that must have had a significant impact on a number of people. I'm hoping that the impact has been positive when I think about the most recent changes and influences on practice and the way that we view inclusivity. And I hope that is going to continue. I'm fairly certain it is. There's plans of how data can be captured for those that are within our services to understand the intersectionality better. The learning and development team always listen really carefully to any feedback that comes back to try and embed things within practice and come up with new ideas for that to happen. And I feel really heard by them and the principal social worker. So there's an impact there. Changing some of the language that young people asked us to change, that's a work in progress and will continue to be, because it's about doing no further harm. So we need to make a conscious shift, not just say or pay any kind of lip service to things, but actually make a conscious shift with the language that we're using. So I hope the impact's positive, specifically for young people, children and young people, and the community. I guess the other impact is that I'm really vocal and I'm never going to shut up about it. So you may as well listen now, because I'll just carry on forever. I think. And hopefully out of all of those things, then it's seen as a positive.
Absolutely.
Is there any lessons or final kind of things you want to say to kind of wrap up, or for people listening? Anything they will need to take?
Oh, this is
away?
weird, isn't it? Like, is there anything out there for people listening?
No, not like. It's any takeaways or lessons, or even just like things for people to think about that they can take away after to listen after they've finished watching.
I think that people need to keep doing what they're doing in a strengths-based way. That's our model, but always remain humble. That's the way that I look at things. Is we can make those assumptions. I come back to the beginning. We can make assumptions, but we shouldn't. So we should always remain humble to the impact on others, whether that's with the families we work with, the communities, or whether it's with ourselves as well.
Okay.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Much.
Boom.
Well, you can pick up one of these. I actually do like.
Are they heavy?
They are quite heavy. I'm pretty sure. I didn't want to break them back.
That's a relief. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the recording and
I'll
save
stop
it
that.
so I don't...